a sense of a shift happening in terms of how we not only engage with each other, but also engage with the planet and the place that we live. And so there's some very exciting topics today and just some good news as well. So I'm going to open it up to the team and we will carry on from there.
Yeah, I think what we wanted to talk about today was like the beauty of community and how community development could like change things in a positive way. We talk about the news, so we talk a lot about like heavy stuff. But today is like almost all good news, I would say, or pretty investigative of the good innovations around the world. And we wanted to start with actually sustainable architecture around the world, and basically how it helped communities and how it could potentially save the planet in a very natural way, how it's a good example for us. So we have one example of this in a school in a desert in India that is keeping their students cool, basically, in the desert. And the infrastructure is pretty nice, pretty organized. And we have one initiative in Detroit, which is pretty nice because it's reuse of a space that was probably left abandoned or maybe unloved for so many decades. And so I wondered if, Nadia, you would like to talk a little bit more about that, especially like Detroit.
Oh yeah, I would love to. So basically, a mother took initiative on reconstructing her block after her child had been hit by a car. And so she wanted to take this initiative so that when people are walking down the street, they didn't feel danger, they felt safety, and they also felt like this community is up and coming. So what she did was completely renovate buildings and start an after school care for children and just make it very colorful and just nice aesthetically on the eyes so that the community could find some place to go and feel welcomed and know that whoever is developing this community is taking it into the hands of making it feel very homey and cozy. So yeah, I saw that story and I was really happy by it because this is the kind of initiative that you would want to take in a community and want to redevelop so that everyone feels welcome. And interesting enough, the surrounding communities are still considered unsafe and still considered like high crime rates, but she's expanding her blocks and she wants to expand to further blocks so that it's like merging into one big hub of safety and creativity and fun. It's a lot of colorful, fun buildings and a place for business to thrive, new businesses to thrive. One of her clients couldn't have the lease or the monthly payment to start her business as I believe it was like goddess jewelry or something. And the developer was like, hey, you get started and we'll figure out the rest. And that's the kind of initiative with that trust and that community building that really gets you far, like the relationships you built, as well as, just building those relationships and creating that space for people to thrive in. That was beautiful.
And so I wonder, like, how did she start all of this? Like, did she need funds, contacts? What was the origin of?
I believe she organized with funds and she's still collaborating with other business owners to get the funding to expand. But I think once she started and the government and officials have seen how successful it is, it's more easier to get funded and more like feasible. It was like a very creative project to start off with. Not many people are doing that, especially in Detroit. But once she saw that how successful it was and how the neighborhood really enjoyed it, it was easier to expand.
Yeah. And you said that it's not every day that you see this type of initiative, especially in Detroit.
Mm.
It made me feel like she reclaimed her power there.
Yeah.
Like it was like someone stopped feeling abandoned after like Detroit's economy had collapsed and just like rebuilt with what they had, basically built a community of more harmony, in a place where people would feel like there was no hope, like there was no future. And I think that's one, I think, common denominator of all of our stories today is like there are sometimes a miracle and human-made initiatives in places where people feel like it shouldn't happen, basically. In Detroit and in an Indian desert where like people feel like how do people even live there, you know? But life is made possible by good, loving people who take their design and architecture seriously, who love their community and just build with them. And that makes me think of like what we're doing here as well, building community, whether online or physically. You know, there's just something very healing in the way that people don't give up because they just love their brothers and sisters. They don't feel like abundance is like it's outside of them in another city or another country. They do with what they have and creates like wealth and abundance there.
Mhm. I'm glad you brought up that spiritual point because after losing her child, she did have grief, and going through Detroit's economic turmoil, it was also grief for her community. And she turned that grief, she transcended it into something very worthwhile and beautiful, just like the Indian school and their architecture there.
I found it very interesting, and it's something that's probably been a saying that I've heard over the years, that necessity breeds innovation. And you kind of see that you see this person responding to what was a need in the community. But it didn't just start off with a response to a need. It started off with really a desire to love, a desire to look at this place and go, this is not all it can be. It can be more. And I mean, if you just at the beginning of the video, you see the rundown state of some of the houses that had been abandoned and people leaving the area. And she, you know, yes, the innovation came through multiple responses in terms of grief, but also in terms of love, but also in terms of a desire to create something better. And I think that's really the sense that I kind of get from all our stories today, is the sense to create something better. And even when we go further into those 5 kids surviving, it was a desire to live, you know. And in all honesty, if you take this and you look at it and you go, it's actually a desire to have a really healthy relationship with life. And so you shift things that you know, it's literally saying one person's trash is the other person's treasure kind of thing. You look at something and you go, I see the potential. And it's something that she said in her video. She's like, yeah, I see the potential. Not everybody saw it the way I saw it. but I saw it and I chose to act on it. But you just, that's the more powerful sense for me is just that desire to actually have a relationship with life and create a good life around you.
This reminds me, it's a good point that you brought up. It reminds me of when they were building the architecture for the Indian school. And while they were building, they realized that they would be building on top of 2 trees. And in order to avoid that, they stopped construction and they moved their construction to respect that life that was growing and, in fact, honor it. So they circled it around in the middle of the architecture for that life that is still growing. So yeah, it's a beautiful point you brought up.
I think there's also a big lesson about not comparing with others. I say that because I see people in the community, like, you know, starting their own path and being unapologetically themselves, and just creating where they feel God is. And so Grenville said that not everyone saw the potential, but like God gave that spark to these people to start something there. So there was potential and there is God there. And it's not because not everyone sees it that there's nothing there. And proof is, like, if it's meant to happen, like, you will be supported in doing that, and you can build your projects hand in hand with life, hand in hand with God. And also the truth is that there is life everywhere. Like, there is no man's land, no void of love in the universe. And we just have to see it, seize it, and I guess create value there because we love, like, create that spark in all places of our lives. And like, we'll see initiatives like that just flourishing everywhere, you know.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Spill story, the story about that app Spill that was like an alternative to Twitter, you know, and that was more like respectful even down to its algorithms to like the Black community, people who like speak English in like different ways than like what people consider like the standard. And yeah, and also more respect for like original creators, and how these people who are creating it and yeah, have created it, like saw a need, and then they were like, yeah, we're just gonna like break away from Twitter, you know, and from the mainstream here, quote unquote, and just create something that serves these unmet needs and stuff. And that there was potential there, and that it was seen as like, they saw it as a promising direction to go, you know, like you were saying, whereas like previously people maybe hadn't seen that as promising. And yeah, it's really cool for people to like do that and yeah, claim their power, and yeah, like you said, realize that like the potential and that you have is all within you, and like your good is within you, and it's not like over there or in the hands of others, you know.
I think it's nice that you brought up the point of potential, because one of the things that stood out to me about this story, this Detroit story, and this woman creating this eco village was also that she's looking at, she's also helping, you know, but one of the initiatives is a homework house. And so it's helping kids who may be unsupervised in the afternoons, who don't have aftercare, to have somewhere to go, to be supervised in terms of their homework, to have access to things like virtual reality. And I think I even saw a flight simulator in the video. And, it was just, and one of the things that you said was, it's just nice to give these kids who would be disadvantaged otherwise an opportunity to have access to these kind of things, to even the playing field, which is a very important statement, for the reason that if you don't know what's on the playing field in the first place, your potential is probably slightly stunted, because you don't know that there are those avenues to explore. There are those things in life where you could find your niche and not be steered in a direction that your family says. And I mean, it's been very much a thing in non-white communities, that families steer kids in the direction of doctors and lawyers and accountants and all those other things, because they believe that those are lucrative careers that guaranteed income kind of thing. And so it's very interesting to have somebody now have kids learning how to play chess and sitting in front of flight simulators and creating music and things like that. And and I know when I grew up, it wasn't a career. Those kind of things wouldn't have been considered a career, and they wouldn't have been lucrative. But the interesting thing about it also is that I was probably a lot more stubborn than most. So I studied what I studied, not knowing what I was going to do with it afterwards, kind of thing. But you kind of have to almost be stubborn to follow your heart when it comes to getting your family to spend educational money. And so I feel like this initiative, just exposing kids to greater things, does start to unlock potential that they may not even have thought that they have.
Yeah, speaking of like evening the playing field, the prisoners that got that opportunity to get educated, get their associate degree from Yale is like, and also a story of evening their playing field. I remember one of them saying that they didn't feel like they were in prison. They felt like they were going into campus when they would go and get classes and get educated. So it was wonderful to see that these kind of opportunities are here for those who may not have those opportunities.
I wish India was there because in all that we see and hear about how uneven the playing field is in terms of criminality and different classes and ethnicities, ethnic groups, and where you live, depending on where you live, I feel like it's so good to see that kind of news where like inmates get graduated and they're students of Yale, and they get to like not be out of the system, because I guess the thing with prison, the thing with jail is that it gets people out of the system, out of life, and doesn't really integrate them. I feel like what Andy would say, I guess, is like that for some people from certain ethnic groups, they were already not integrated into life, and so they got into criminality for several reasons. And the punishment for that is that they get even farther away from the system, and they never really get to go back in. And so the fact that they've been given this opportunity feels like a step in the right direction, I would say. And basically it makes me think of like the Heaven on Earth series by Jeff and Shaleia. or New Earth series, and they talk about incarceration in jail, and they talk about how in the future it's going to be built in a way where people are just going to learn how to spiritually and physically get into the system again, instead of just like being incarcerated and jail time. And so I don't know how you guys feel about that. But like it feels like maybe potentially a glimpse at the future, and potentially a glimpse at a love list that we would do for reintegration in the system for people that feel like very out of reach or that have lost touch with it. And it feels like a good opportunity to just like get them grounded spiritually and physically, and instead of like just like punishment and jail, basically.
I think it's an important point that you raise in terms of the level of reintegration. And I think we spoke to this quite a bit during our Black Lives Matter conversation, in the sense that the prison system is not geared to necessarily rehabilitate the inmates. And so introducing education into this system does make it transformative. And I think that's really the purpose of, and in fact, that's the connection between the majority of our stories today, is the transformative power of change. It's how people take on those opportunities that are offered to them and use it to transform society, to use it to transform a life, use it to transform their own lives. And I think that the desire for change has always been something that's probably part of the human condition, but there's it kind of works on a continuum where there's a big desire for change on the one end of the continuum and the resistance to change on the other end of the continuum. And they often seem to battle each other in this kind of literally tug of war game that sometimes sees the transformation doing well and sometimes the transformation not doing so well. And we've seen it play out in various things, including politics, where nations make decisions because they believe that a leader is going to be more transformative than another leader. And in some respects it works out, and in other respects that leader becomes the abuser and starts to try to be a dictator as opposed to a transformative leader of that society. So I think the transformation that consciousness is calling in is starting to play out in various respects. And that's why we see the big battle between rights as well. So there's a big call for change, but there's also a big call for no change or limited change, or sometimes the change is not followed through. And I think that that energy of transformation is probably something that does scare people, because it requires a level, quite a bit of surrender. It requires a level of trust. You have to trust that that change is going to improve things, because otherwise you don't subscribe to it. And I know for myself, if I feel that the change is for the worse, I'm likely to push against it as opposed to support it. And I think that most people are in that mindset, because as much as we'd like to think that we're altruistic as human beings, we all want to know what's in it for me.
I feel like there's something there deeper core, but I don't know what it is. Sage, do you want to say something? Or?
Yeah, I guess like, well, yeah, my feeling about that was, so the Yale college education program, in the Connecticut prisons, it kind of just shows how like, just anybody and everybody has the ability to, achieve whatever they set their mind out to. And there's like, obviously, like Yale has like in society, like it has like high prestige and aura of prestige. And it just shows that like somebody can achieve something in of high prestige, like no matter like what their history, or you know what I mean, or their life experience. And I feel like that's kind of been like what has motivated universities to like increase their diversity, and like basically have kids and people of any age come in, from all different kinds of backgrounds, because they know that like they're advancing this belief that everybody and anybody is like capable of like anything, like whatever they desire. That's what I feel with this. I feel like it's like Connecticut, apparently Andia said that Connecticut is really ahead, or advanced, like you could say, like a trailblazer in criminal justice reform. So this is just like a little bit, like a little taste of like what could be in many other states. But I know that in many other states there's such a like negative, biased opinion toward people in prison, and beyond that, like it's also has a racial element to it too, that something like that's why that's not happening yet, because everybody needs to decide for themselves that they deserve an opportunity, and that they deserve love and to be treated well, like with respect, like no matter what they've done or anything like that. And just moving beyond that, like traditionalist, like I want to almost say biblical, not that the Bible necessarily advances the idea of punishment, but I think a lot of people who really cleave to like the Old Testament, like it infuses you with that kind of like punishment culture, and that's what we're healing in this community, which is great. So yeah, so I don't know, did that coalesce into like any point that you can
Well,
that anyone can respond to?
I think to me, when you were talking, it just pointed out how that like they had to be choosing that, and they chose that, and they chose to take back their power and to have that opportunity for themselves. And I know that those prisoners, those people, like they were making that choice, and they chose to better themselves, they and they manifested that. They manifested an opportunity like that. You really do. Everyone has the power of choice, and you have to choose it and move forward with that. And I think that, because currently, right, so currently I work in a nonprofit. I work in a shelter, and I definitely see people who go through hard times, and who would seem to not have a lot of opportunities. And there are definitely people who are actively choosing to change that and get out of that and move forward in a different direction in their life. And there are people who are not choosing that. Like you can tell, they are certainly not. So I feel like it just also comes back to the core of empowerment, the power of your choice, and that you must choose it.
Right. And I feel like it did it did link up to everything we said before. One thing that touched me, I feel like it was a very sensitive point for consciousness, is the fact that collectively we could believe that people are inherently bad. It's not that, prison is there for a reason and there's like a justice system, but there's something about like the consciousness of prisoners and the way it changed for these people in Connecticut. And it's just telling me that more than like bettering themselves, like making the choice to better themselves, like Isaiah would say, it's like recognizing that they're already divine, basically. And I think like this perception of themselves is removed for many people that are incarcerated. And it's just the feeling that it's bad. The vision of other people is that these are bad people, and obviously these are like serial killers, right? Because why would they be in jail? Which is like most of them not really the case, And that just makes me, there's a lot of like releasing there. So I feel like consciousness is just healing that, much like addiction or like accidents or like errors of life, like challenges, there's nothing about that makes you a person worth of punishment. It's not about that. It's never about that. You're always divine. You just need to claim it, basically.
So
Yeah, I think you
I
nailed that. I think it's exactly that. It's knowing, people need to know, first know it, that they're divine, and then like claim and accept it. Yeah.
Sorry, the sound just did some random thing. So yeah, I think just in terms of that point, so I agree with you, Yurine, in the sense that they do need to remember that they're divine, but I also believe that similarly to how there are components of discipline within love. It might sound like punishment, but there is a level of discipline required in terms of being part of society. Otherwise, it is going to turn into the wild, wild west. And unfortunately, everybody's going to do as they please, probably to the detriment of society. And I think that's part of the thing that, Jeff spoke to us very early on about whether we actually have an upset with the system itself and why that upset exists. Because at the core of it, we may not have designed the system, but we most certainly are part of the system. And we most certainly contribute to the system in one way or another, just the way we contribute to consciousness. And so we need to understand what is beneficial to the process of discipline within the system.
Yeah, it's just a layer of like, most probably confusion for most people about what is love and discipline being love and non-punishment, and like releasing victim mentality, like victimhood, and realizing that basically we're all healing that as Black people, as people of color, people from the LGBT community. We're all healing upsets with the system and like feeling like we're out of it because like maybe people are not nice to us, so yeah, there's definitely a component of that. I think it's a different layer, but it's definitely a confusion within what's love, ergo discipline, and so what's what's punishment. But also it feels like, knowing that, because that's what I healed inside of me, like going through a challenge and going through a down doesn't mean that your level of divinity goes down too. And that's what I was addressing. It's like the healing, that divinity is constant, whatever you do with it. And then it's all illusion and all bullshit and all things to release.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up, and like it kind of parallels to what I was feeling about, you could really be living a prison within your own life, within your own neighborhood, feeling unsafe, the family structure, like the crime rates. And then you could be thinking like, oh, I hit even more rock bottom by going to prison, when really this is the catalyst, this is the change, the discipline that moves you forward, allows you to perceive a new choice, and actually opens doors for you that may not have been open in the prison that you used to live before. So yeah, not all change is like bad, and the new perception of discipline.
So I like that you mentioned that, because it's also something that we spoke to a while ago around the universal laws. And so this starts to feed into the law of cause and effect. And we know that the premise of everything that we do within our healing is that it starts on the inside and spills over into the outside. So you find that you get the result on the outside as a result of the transformation on the inside. And so again, it all leads to change, and it all leads to how much we desire to change and to shift and to live a better life and have a better experience in life. And so I agree with you that there's probably on a level a mentality of imprisonment in the first place. Otherwise, the soil would not be fertile for the manifestation of imprisonment.
And I think imprisonment touches on the story of the kids that were lost in Brazil. And it's kind of like their struggle that they had to go through in order to save themselves and then be saved by the government officials. What do you guys think about that?
Would you like to lay ground for people listening first, and then we can talk about that, or anyone about the story?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I believe it was 5 kids who fell from a plane crash and lost their mother. And it was about 40 days that they survived in the jungle, trying to find a way out. And it was really commendable, the efforts that Brazil had put forward to find the children. Ultimately, they found trails of the children, and traces, but they couldn't really find them until I think it was the 40th day or so. So it was a story of survival and of their grit to keep going forward. But it was also a story of how Mother Nature, how the divine always protects you and keeps you safe and just keeps you going, because I believe it was the youngest was less than a year old. How the baby survived, I have no idea, but that is a miracle in itself and a testament to God.
Yeah, they kept the baby alive through it because they had known from, I think definitely their mother and maybe others in the family, that there was a certain tree you could find, and if you found the unripe nut of the tree and you like split it open with your teeth and you kind of chewed the pulp inside, you could feed that to a baby, like it's a baby food. And so they use that, and that's like indigenous knowledge, because these were indigenous kids, and they had, I believe they had grown up in, I think it was the Colombian Amazon. Partly they would be taken to parts of the forest by their mom to like learn the ancestral knowledge having to do with subsistence in the forest and other things like that. And then part of the time, I don't know, they live somewhere else and everything like that. And so that was really interesting. And I feel like beyond that story of like survival, it's also such a story of the indigenous peoples of the world in the Americas, like preserving their heritage, because it's very symbolic. I feel like this whole thing kind of unfolded as a way for them and for everyone to work through that upset of how like it seems like indigenous cultures in the Americas, and I think around the world, you could say, have been like kind of pushed aside or like run over by Western culture, and also whatever dominant culture there was, right? And so it kind of, you know, it's so symbolic because like these 5 kids were on this trip with their mom, and their mom taught them everything, or mostly everything, that they would end up using to survive in the jungle. But the mother, unfortunately, died in the plane crash. And so then it was like really like, it was really, I guess, like up to the children to use like what they had learned, what they had been taught, this like, ancestral knowledge. So I feel like it's kind of, like their way of working through that upset of like, oh my gosh, like, we don't want to lose our culture. We don't want to lose our way of life, you know? And that came through with them, like experiencing losing their mom, or her like, leaving the planet for that time, and then working through that afterward. So it's a really cool story. I feel like that's maybe the deeper message of it. You know?
And it just goes to show you're never met with a challenge you're not prepared for. I mean, obviously they weren't prepared for this challenge, but God had definitely prepared them through their mother to survive and go through it.
I feel like it's also like the world should notice and take notice how valuable indigenous knowledge and culture is, because it kept those kids alive. Holy shit, you know, that is fucking amazing. So I think that like this story happening, like just, I don't know, just really shows the value, like how valuable that knowledge is, and that we should all be like, it would benefit everyone to know those type of things.
Right. 100% agree. Like when Sage was talking, like hit me how grateful I was for like everything I learned from the Native American side of my family, or even the Native American side of my cultures. Because like growing up in the French region overseas, basically in Guadeloupe in the Caribbean, you would go to summer camp, or like you would do ecotourism, which is like ecological tourism, and you would just go on the trails of, like for me, my ancestors, basically how they lived, like which plant they used, like how they prevented like mosquito bites, deadly animal bites, how they would feed, like how they would follow the water. And even like I went once, maybe twice, to like French Guyana, which is like the French region in parts of the Amazonia, who has a border with Brazil. And they would teach you, like, basically it was like, oh, like Native Americans, and you felt at home, and they would teach you like how you could use the sugar of a tree as milk, basically, and it was nourishing, like which plants you could and animals you could eat, insects, even like how to live with snakes or avoid them, depending on which snakes you had in your region, how to build a cabana, things like that. And it's like, was just natural for us. I was a kid, you know, except for the last time I went like on the trail of my ancestors in the Caribbean, I was like 22. But it's like, it's my culture, and it's really that tourism, and sometimes it's mostly forgotten. Not a lot of people know about that, but it taught me so much. Like spiritually, I felt like I had like spiritual downloads during these visits. I just felt connected to my own, and I felt connected to parts of me. And I wish the world could see that. I want to share it with the world, like all day, every day. And it's not about like overburying people with like, well, did you see that Native American, you know, but just being yourself. And I think these kids, unbeknownst to themselves, like they just were themselves, and they taught the world a huge lesson, because we've talked about this story for weeks. Like, when are we talking about the children? When are we talking about the Amazonian children, you know? And they're freaking role models. And for me, it's just like, there is a sentiment of pride, of nostalgia, and also like reminiscing like why I'm grateful for my cultures, and for other people that maybe don't have like links with Native Americans. It's just like, hey, wow, you know, like we have things to learn from all cultures. So yeah, that's just what I thought. It was a cool story, but also I felt very much that we gotta be grateful for the cultures that we have, because like, holy crap, like some of them can teach you things.
I feel like there's another component to the story in terms of, again, it comes back to choice, and it's something that, as I shared earlier, it's literally the choice to live, the choice to survive, the resilience of human beings. And at that age, to be resilient enough to survive in basically what anybody else would consider the jungle is quite a feat, considering that as adults, some of us wouldn't know, we wouldn't have the first clue. And so it's something that you spoke to as well, Yoreen, in terms of just, you know, the knowledge that is passed down through cultures that allow you to feel connected to life and to humanity and to nature. And it's something that probably is going to, if really noted, is going to probably have a lot of people sitting back and going, we cannot eradicate everything in favor of one or the other. There needs to, the lesson is almost, there needs to be an incorporation of a lot more of what is the heritage of humanity than what we currently do. And it's something we spoke to last week in terms of acknowledging that something is there so that we can celebrate it, or acknowledging that it's there so that we can solve it. And so, you know, for me, this is the sense of acknowledging that there's value across so many cultures, and that there's ways to incorporate that into life. Like, you know, reading a story where kids know that the pulp of a certain nut could be used as baby food is something I learned because of the story, you know. And you kind of have to go, holy crap, there's so much on this planet that we actually still have to learn.
Same. I would also like to say, like, holy crap, can European professional builders just like take Indian architecture into account and please build something so that we finally have a natural heating or cooling system? Like, everyone knows theoretically how to heat or cool a house, but nobody's doing it. And it's like, for the love of God, just make our life easier and also like more friendly to the planet. Basically, like, it's so easy, please. You know, obviously it's not just Indian culture, like a lot of cultures do it. In the Caribbean they do it, in Africa they do it, you know. But it's just like, hey, you know, like, it's available, it's readily available. Like, please be grateful for it, use it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a big thing around sharing of knowledge as well. And you know, like just reading the India story and the school being built in the desert kind of thing, and the natural cooling that they've applied, and it, you know, just reminded me that in one of the build-ups to a soccer World Cup, Germany, when Germany was hosting the World Cup, they actually constructed stadiums that were temporary, so that they could recycle that building material for hospitals and schools. And so, you know, all of those kind of things just start to say, hey guys, we can do so much more from the point of view of actually collaborating with each other as opposed to competing with each other.
And speaking of learning from each other, Estonia is like the first Baltic country to legalize same-sex marriage, which is awesome. How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a great step for them. It's huge in terms of like expanding human rights, but also like for Estonia, it felt like having visited there like very briefly 10 years ago, and like seeing what it was like and feeling the vibe and getting a feel for what they were going through. It felt very much like they were independent from Russia. You know, they'd been independent from the Soviet Union since like it broke up and everything in the early 90s. But there's still this feeling of like being tied to Russia, or almost feeling like I am like wanting to be independent, but also feeling like that independence was very tenuous and a little bit shaky because of just feeling like so overpowered by Russia, you know, and how Russia tries to be like a very threatening country, and it tries to be, and not necessarily succeeds, and it won't. But Estonia, it had that feeling of like the cherished independence, the love for itself as a country, but also the fear of like living right next to Russia and everything. And so I feel like with them doing that, it's kind of like them saying, we don't want to be like closed off and isolated from the world. We don't want to cling to these like old traditional values, is what like any politician uses who wants to like oppose like, you know, same-sex marriage. It's like, it's a tradition and that kind of thing, you know. And people are saying like, well, why? Like,
Say it
why?
again. Say it again.
Was that Italian? Was that Italian or Russian? I can't tell.
No, it's tradiция in Russian, but in Estonian, like it's like a completely different language. So I can't do their accent, but I feel like though it is, it's like that was a holdover from the Soviet Union, like feeling more so conservative socially, and people have been liberating themselves like kind of within, basically within their own minds, and being more open to doing that. And yeah, I think that's cool. And they said that the Ukraine war is what really kind of inspired it to finally happen, because it made them think like, what kind of world do we want to be aligned with? You know, like, do we want to be aligned with a world of freedom or a world of like tyranny, basically? So that'll do it.
You'll steal the words right out of my mouth, because like my Lithuanian friends have been feeling the same. And Ukraine definitely sparked that match of just like, we won't ever go back to being with Russia again. But for them, it's also like almost like a twin flame union journey, you know. They've been desiring this for years and they've worked at it, and we're finally seeing like the external results for Estonia. And so I just feel like the other people in the Baltics are just going to follow suit. It's definitely not new. They definitely struggle with it, but I think it was their lesson. Quite probably, I'm very happy that our stories match and align, and that I feel like it's the same for Lithuania, and how Ukraine had that positive liberating effect on people. And so it was just like Nadia said earlier, like there is like change everywhere. Like there's good change, like freedom from a prison, like the bad situation can also spark, you know, that desire in you. And yeah, that's all I have to say. I just feel like it's a good step, and the rest of the Baltic and even the rest of the region is going to feel more connected. I feel like Finland is going to get closer to them too. It's all about communities as well. It's all about like locals getting closer, harmony. I said they're almost on the path of twin flame union, but it's like same-sex marriage and it's harmony. So it's kind of the same. And yeah, that's my take on it. But obviously very positive and very inspiring. Like they've been working at it for quite a while.
I feel like that's a good place to wrap up for today. Unless anybody else has any other thoughts to add. Oh, well, cool. Thank you, everybody, for the conversation. Thank you to the people that have been following us. To those of you that haven't yet, please also feel free to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel, which congratulations to our Church of Union YouTube channel for reaching 1,500 subscribers today. That was quite epic. So yeah, thank you, everybody. We look forward to seeing you again for another conversation in our series on our world today, the Unionist perspective, next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.